a lot of people are really intimidated by if they haven't been doing joint ventures or strategic partnerships, they're intimidated about how to get started. And I loved what you talked about with buckets. Like just find someone that's in a similar, that serves the same people as you do, but in a different niche. And so maybe explain that a little bit, because I think that's a really powerful way of like, go find a couple of people like this and just start having conversations with them.
My call to action was find 1 to 5 folks, but the stumbling block is you're like, who? Like, this sounds great, Matt. Who do I find? And for some reason, a lot of folks, their default is they'll come up with competitors. they'll think of like, or like, or kind of like alternatives, right? Like they're not like direct competitors, but they are still alternatives in your market, right? So if you're a gym, like your first thought is like, well, what about like a med spa or like, or like a fat loss clinic? And you're like, no, you guys are like too closely related that the likelihood that they'll want to promote you is very low. And so what I encourage folks to do is you think about these big buckets of types of businesses of like health, wealth, and relationships. You could distill down, most businesses are solving one, a problem in one of those categories. Is it health? Is it wealth? Is it relationships? And if you know which one you're in, you're like, if I'm a gym, I'm in health, no doubt. Then force yourself to think of potential affiliates in those other categories. And when you do that, you start to realize that there's actually way more possibility of cross promotion and affiliate arrangements or joint venture deals than you initially thought was possible. So if I pick the local business example, like who could be a great partner for a gym? You're like a grocery store, maybe that's health. I'll go like wealth, right? So you go like the accountant, the real estate, like the real estate agents, like there's so many other categories of businesses where if you got them to intentionally promote you, even if it was just the value add of now people know I exist and I'm warm in their mind. I'm no longer neutral or cold. I'm actually a warm identity when they're considering, or in the future when they do consider. But that's what I'd start with, is like know which bucket you're in, and then think about folks that serve the same people you do in the different buckets. You have to really get down to like, who am I actually serving? And so you can get specific in that way too. If I'm a gym, and if the reality is, if the majority of your customers are, women aged 35 to 55, own it. That specificity will make this easier, because then you might think like, well, I could choose anybody, but you're like, oh, there might be a boutique clothing store that perfectly serves, or if you're like, oh, the majority of my market is new moms, then be thinking like, well, then think of the baby store, right? Or think of if you're not a regional company, or you're like, you're more national or international, you're like, well, there was a good example. Someone at the event, they teach moms how to become bookkeepers. They're in the wealth space. They're like, and they know they teach stay-at-home moms to become great bookkeepers so they can work part-time and make full-time income. Like that's kind of their thing. And so you're like, well, there's somebody else who helps new moms lose the baby weight, or someone else who helps new moms get their kids to go to sleep. And those are different categories but serves the same folks. And so getting them to kind of cross promote, it's mutually beneficial.